This is a film about climate change and corporate leadership, not in the West, but in India, where the economy and the people are profoundly vulnerable unless action is taken now. My name is Mala Nimhera, and I'm a climate campaigner. I'm also part of a new generation of Indians for whom climate change is our generational challenge. This is an issue about our future and the decisions that we take. Will we act in time? If we don't, then we won't be able to make the transition to a society that's capable of protecting its citizens and the environment. Where will that leadership come from, however? Where will the innovators come from who will prevent us from making the mistakes of the West? Our work suggests that Indian companies and Indian entrepreneurs are ready to play a big role. This is their story. This is a story about climate heroes, Indian style. The position of the government of India is well known.
We look upon the issue of climate change from a somewhat broader perspective than merely an issue of carbon emission. We have suggested, why don't we get together as developed countries and some of the emerging countries and really collaborate on, in a sense, disruptive technologies which can really bring about an accelerated shift from a carbon-based economy to a renewable-based economy.
The view that the problem is not of India's making and that India is a victim requiring financial compensation is deep-seated.
India is doing a lot more on the ground, much more than what it can afford to do. India's per capita emissions are 20 times lower than that of Europe, maybe 40 times lower of that of United States. The action has to be facilitated, supported and activated by all the countries of the world, because this is something which has happened because of past emission. It's a historical responsibility. Then we have insurgency, we have terrorism, so we have to divert resources for that. How do we, in situation like this, find resources to deal with a daunting challenge of this magnitude?
Little is said in this debate, however, of India's own growing emissions and the fact that even if all developed countries were to stop emitting tomorrow, we would still be locked into decades of climate change. According to the former president of the Maldives, President Gayoom, he puts it thus.
Our country is very low-lying. The land rises only about 3.5 to 5 feet above mean sea level. So in case of any rise in sea levels, even 40 centimeters or more, that will mean a lot of damage to our country. So I think it's very important that all countries of the world come to a common ground in face of climate change and agree on specific targets to be followed by everyone without any exception.
India as a country is acutely vulnerable to climate impacts. Most of our vast rural population will be affected by the highly climate-sensitive dependencies that they have on our resources such as forests, fisheries and of course agriculture. Indeed, many of the people here who are working the soil, those who are sailing in our waters and those who are working in our forests, will be the first and the worst hit by climate change. Climate impacts will hit everything, from India's water and energy security to our public health and food production, from our environment to our biodiversity, and of course also our jobs, our livelihoods, and the entire broader economy.
Our food security will suffer, our water security will suffer, our livelihood security systems, which are based upon natural resources, land and water, will suffer. So it is disastrous consequences, particularly when our population is still growing and we are likely to overtake China in terms of total numbers in another 30 years. Also, about 25% of India's population live within 50 kilometers of shoreline. The tsunami of December 26, 2004 was a wake-up call. It led to a lot of loss of life in the coastal states and of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we are very vulnerable. If the Himalayan snows melts, if the glaciers recede, floods will become more common in the Indo-Gangetic plains, which is very heavily populated, very heavily populated. Further high temperature will lead to the evaporation of water from the ground. The groundwater table will go down. And also our rivers and so on will get dry.
Climate impacts won't be felt in some distant future. They're being felt right now. Professor Shugata Hazra, one of the country's leading oceanographers at Jadavpur University, has been studying the impacts of climate change on one of India's most prominent climate hotspots, the Sundarbans.
We are observing there is a 0.019 degrees centigrade per year temperature rise of sea surface temperature annually. We have lost 2 islands called Lohachora and Supari Bhanga. We have, identified 13 vulnerable islands. You can understand the threat, 4.5 million people. If 39% of them is below poverty line, if they don't have coping capacity, if they don't have health, education, how they will fight the rising intensity of cyclones and the coastal erosion, and how they will survive in the climate change scenario.
In this situation, more and more voices, from Al Gore to Ban Ki-moon's, are turning to business to see whether business, with its grand talk of corporate responsibility and sustainability, can make the difference, to see whether it can actually cut through some of the politicization of the discussion and lead more pragmatic solutions.
You are the pioneers of Indian economic development, and I count on you to become again a pioneer in leading these climate change issues. We need your ideas, your investment, and we need your innovation, and we need your can-do spirit.
A good place to start is Calcutta. Now renamed Kolkata, the city was home to the East India Company, the world's first joint stock corporation and the precursor to the modern corporation. On the other side of Jaurangi, one can find the modern inheritors of the company, the giant ITC. Its chief executive, Yogi Deveshwar, was one of the first to sound the alarm in corporate India on sustainability and climate change issues.
Everybody has to get engaged, particularly business, because business has got so many touch points with society. And not only because it has financial resource, but it has the managerial resource. So every company has to now make transparent as to what are the implications on financial capital formation, on social capital formation, and also on ecological capital formation. We have to create a totally new definition of purposes of business.
India is a country of great diversity. One of the communities that has made it their own and founded some of the finest industrial houses in India is the Parsi community. The Parsis, or Zoroastrians, fled persecution in Iran 250 years ago and migrated to India. One of these immigrant families was the Tatas. The Tatas can indeed be credited with laying the foundations of modern India. Now J.J. Irani, the former head of Tata Steel, heads up the group-wide committee on climate change.
Main, shall we say, emphasis of our attempt up to now has been to find out, in a way, how guilty we are or where do we stand. We are not short on policies. What we are short on is their implementation. Without an awareness of climate change, the alternative is quite dark and dismal. In fact, there is no alternative.
Jamshed Godrej is a descendant of the founder. He's an ardent environmentalist and has led the movement within CII, the Confederation of Indian Industries, towards climate consciousness.
All our businesses have been given the mission that sustainability has to be a part of their agenda. Our main thrust with government is that over time we have to move from a more voluntary system to a more regulated system. On policy, we would like to see the government bring in policy which is challenging for industry and for society, but do it in a gradual way. That's where industry works very closely with government today. I'm not so worried on industry. I think industry will very much come forward because it becomes a competitiveness issue.
Nandan Nilekani from Infosys is another business leader with a passion for climate change and a desire to make his company carbon neutral.
First of all, we must present an approach to development which combines the aspirations of people with sustainable development. And when we are at the early stages of this development, if we can change the whole paradigm, we can actually come out winners. And given that India's solutions have to be high volume, low cost, high quality and green, I think you will see a lot of entrepreneurial activity which generate these solutions. But the framework of incentives have to be in place. I think we have to work on multiple fronts. We have to work on renewables, we have to work on the grid, we have to work on creating a culture, we have to look at the whole issue of water, we have to look at the issue of subsidies. Preparing for a post-carbon economy is in our strategic interest. We have to find ways of making it also politically resonant so that it becomes part of the
political conversations.
India's IT leaders have moved quickly to position themselves as carbon literate climate champions.
We have at least 15,000 of our engineers who are directly involved in product design, and many of them are high-tech products, and many of them do telecommunication work and things like that. So how to make the products green is one of the design features that goes into it. We create awareness both globally as well as in India, so that the governments understand that businesses are aligned to the goal that we have set ourselves as humanity. And business is not pulling in the other direction as we have seen in some other countries, but we are actually encouraging the government to step forward and to make this a more habitable planet.
The experience of many Western multinationals on the climate agenda is beginning to be internalized and taken up by the Indian leadership.
The opportunity for organizations such as ours that are very deeply entrenched in India, in India's success, in India's businesses, can only benefit from the next wave of investment, which has to be in the space of climate change. If we can continue to place before our corporate clients the opportunities that exist, they take the decisions in terms of what they can do best, and we stand behind them, helping them fund it, then we've got a win-win solution.
We are building in the gate process of decision making criteria which will enable us to assess and understand the impact of that on climate change. A great example is the breakthrough which we had in how we make soap. We developed what we now call the plowshare mixer. The plowshare mixer significantly reduces the energy consumption in soap making because it doesn't require steam. Now that was a significant breakthrough, reducing something like 15,000 tons per annum of carbon dioxide. We believe our brands will be the carriers of social change, the harbingers of social change. And we would drive our research teams, our development teams, our marketeers to be able to think about propositions, develop products which will reduce water consumption per se.
I used to be a mountaineer when I was younger, and I still have a home in the mountains in the foothills of the Himalayas. I didn't need to read books about the impact or the changes that were taking place in the environment. What I needed to read about was the reasons for those changes, and now it's become much clearer to me that it's not just simply natural. It's not nature that's caused this, it is human beings that have caused this, and that we need to do something to arrest this. Otherwise, our children are going to be confronted with a very dirty world.
If India is to have a low-carbon future, shifting fossil fuel giants such as Shell will have to be part of the equation. Transportation is also a major challenge. The greenhouse gas emissions from India's cars and vehicles is now becoming a real challenge for the country. Unlike 2 decades ago, consumers today have a plethora of choice if they can afford to purchase a private car. Anand Mahindra is another green industrialist who sees little tension between his role as a vehicle manufacturer and real estate developer and his desire to be an eco-warrior.
Nothing will succeed unless this has gripped the heart of the corporation. You have to build it or knit it into the competitive logic of your company. Hence our green SUVs and our green vehicles, our green tractors. Hence the fact that we renamed our real estate development company Mahindra Life Spaces. Do not mandate technology, mandate the level of emissions that you are going to want. And then, as I said, have regulations which are clear, transparent, consistent and equitable.
For many in India, the real answer to their mobility needs will only come through non-fossil fuel-based private cars and vastly improved public transportation systems. Chetan Maini is a new type of auto manufacturer who believes in both.
City mobility, especially in India, China, and a lot of the growing countries, needed solutions that were very environment friendly. So my interest always was trying to work towards that area. We have 10 global patents, mainly in the energy management space, that are today property of REWA, and we continue to apply for several new patents. There wasn't a regulation for electric cars in India, so we had to work with the regulatory agencies to create the framework to have electric cars and sell them. You need a lot of investments in research and development. This needs to be in universities as well as in the government as well as public and private sector companies.
Shagun Saxena of Reganistar and Amit Chugh of Cosmos Ignite embody this new breed of ecopreneur.
We've spent the last 4 years developing solutions that we can bring to Indian companies to help them reduce their carbon footprints.
We are attempting
to innovate on 3 broad areas. One is to bring disruptive technologies. Second is in the business model, which is a for-profit attempt instead of just the drip feed of government actions and charities alone. And the third is to do this as an international bridge between the so-called West and the developing world.
Primary motivation for me is the opportunity to play a role in addressing 2 of the biggest challenges that we face in India. One is the area of climate change, the other is still poverty.
You allow an ecosystem to develop where affordability is looked at through financial institutions as well as the governments in terms of low-cost funding, patient capital, financing with a longer payback period, etc. I would say that as entrepreneurs or green entrepreneurs, we definitely like a voice.
I want to see our Indian negotiators be very bold. And by doing this, by being bold, the negotiators create the market for these technologies around the world that Indian companies can be successful in serving.
At a time when it seems that green is the new black, solar has definitely got to be the new gold. Solar energy is enjoying an unprecedented resurgence in India. With support of the likes of the Prime Minister, who has pledged himself to India going solar, we have the National Action Plan on Climate Change, which includes solar energy as one of its key 8 missions. There is good reason to be optimistic about solar in India. Experts say that if we dedicate just 1% of our land area to solar, we can power the entire country's electricity needs up to 2030. One of the reasons for this mood of confidence has got to be the hard yards put in already by India's solarpreneurs, the entrepreneurs who've done more than most to put solar on the map.
It's a group of 20-25 houses in a village where we have provided 2 light systems, 1 LED and 1 CFL for night lighting, and they have also got street lights in the outside of on the road so that they have common area lighting. Previously, they were all using kerosene as a primary source of lighting, so it's a complete leap, one step in terms from kerosene to much reliable, safer and cleaner form of lighting. If you look at the poor, it's not only the willpower, it's the basic infrastructure. How do you create doorstep service mechanisms? How do you create doorstep financing mechanisms to provide solar energy so that people don't? That will take long, and appropriate technologies for the poor to actually adapt to increase their income or usage. That's going to take time, and we as in India or China have to see that as a bigger threat than anything else. The Copenhagen is not addressing to that client base.
We have done a lot of projects in Andhra Pradesh and also in Tamil Nadu. So there are 4 smoke-free villages there. Solar cooking is okay once to save the environment and so on, but the women, they wouldn't want to spend any money on a cooker or so on. So we have introduced this element of income generation. Schools in India, urban schools can have a cooker or 2 and generate income to buy cookers for rural schools.
The idea of solar crematorium came from a man who cannot read and write. He said, wow, that's great, can you burn bodies with it? So we said, look, uncle, it's possible to do that, but will people accept it? We are finding it difficult to people to change from normal cooking to solar cooking. Now we are talking of solar crematorium, so it's not just about disposing body, it is about the rituals, it is about soul, it is about religion, it is about feelings. So we think people will not accept it. But he said, look, you are a technocrat, I'm a social scientist, that's our role, let me do it and you take care of the technology. And now it has shown us that if you want to bring in technology, not only economy or ecology, but even the spiritual way is the way to bring it forward. The local resistance is no more there.
In India, we don't have any single, megawatt level power plant. So we thought, let us have a 2 megawatt power plant, first megawatt level power plant in the country. And we are putting up this plant in Asansol area, and India will shift from coal age to solar age. We have Sundarbans. The people of Sundarban, they realize that yes, let us jump from no electricity to clean electricity, no in between. In Calcutta, we have set up the first solar housing complex of the country. These are all rooftop solar PV and building integrated PV with grid connectivity. The project has been constructed by the government, but the investment has come from the private people.
Climate change is often painted as an issue of equity and social justice. This is undoubtedly true. The poorest in our society are the least to blame and the hardest hit. Securing just outcomes for them and securing their livelihoods will be essential. Yet equity is not only social, it's intergenerational. Those with the most to lose will be future generations. As a young nation, with more than 70% of our population under 40, India has a lot at stake. This film has emphasized the importance of 2009 as the make or break year on climate change. The science is telling us that we now have less than 10 years to make the shift. If we leave it any later than that, we run great risk of runaway climate change and further catastrophe, which will be more costly. If we're serious about solutions, we cannot expect business as usual. This film has profiled some of the innovators from India, people who can lead and should play a greater role. Climate change is a global problem requiring a global partnership. Here in India too, the mood is changing. There is a growing sense of confidence that we too can play a role in finding the solution. Indeed, that we can play a role in leading, not just expecting others to do so.